Have you ever come across a disappearance case that feels almost impossible to process? A story where every detail becomes stranger, darker, and more disturbing the deeper you look into it. Some mysteries leave you curious. Others leave you with a feeling of unease because the truth seems far more terrifying than anything you could imagine. The final disappearance in this story is one of those cases. But before we get there, we need to begin with a case that is far more tragic. A story filled with violence, betrayal, and a shocking twist that nobody saw coming. Viewer discretion is advised. In this first case, there is very little information available about a man named Abbas Ahmad and his wife Sarah. What we do know is that they lived in the small village of Qamishli, located hundreds of miles northeast of Damascus, Syria. They had children together, they shared a home, and from the outside they appeared to be an ordinary family. But behind closed doors, their marriage was anything but ordinary. Neighbors described their home as a place filled with constant conflict. Arguments between Abbas and Sarah were not occasional disagreements. They were loud, violent, and frequent enough that they eventually became part of everyday life in the village. People stopped being surprised when they heard shouting coming from their house. According to those who knew the couple, Abbas was usually the one who started these confrontations. After many of these fights, Sarah would disappear from public view. She would not be seen at the market. She would not visit neighbors. Sometimes she would remain inside the house for days. And when she finally appeared again, people noticed the same disturbing signs. Bruises, black eyes, marks on her face, neck, and arms. Friends and relatives worried about her safety. They knew something was wrong. They knew she was suffering. But for reasons that remain unclear, nobody stepped forward to stop it. And so year after year, the cycle continued. The arguments became more intense. The tension inside the home grew worse. Until one night in 1975, everything changed. Another violent argument erupted between Abbas and Sarah. The sound of their screaming echoed through the quiet village. But eventually, the shouting stopped, and after that night, Sarah vanished. At first, people assumed it was another consequence of their troubled marriage. Maybe she was injured. Maybe she was too afraid or too hurt to leave the house. But then something unusual happened. A few days later, Abbas began going to the market alone. For a man living in a traditional household where his wife would normally handle these responsibilities, this immediately caught people's attention. He avoided conversations. He avoided eye contact. He bought only what he needed and quickly left. Eventually, someone finally gathered enough courage to ask him the question everyone was thinking. Where was Sarah? After a long pause, Abbas gave his answer. He claimed that Sarah had abandoned him and their children. According to him, she had reached a point where she could no longer tolerate living with him and had walked away. The story spread throughout the village. And strangely enough, many people believed it. Considering everything Sarah had endured, her disappearance seemed believable. People thought maybe she had finally escaped. But the following morning, the entire situation took a horrifying turn. A farmer discovered something terrifying in a field not far from the family home. A woman's body. But the body had no head. The woman's head was never recovered. Despite this horrific detail, several relatives and neighbors later identified the remains as Sarah. To everyone watching from the outside, the pieces seemed to fit. Years of abuse, a violent marriage, a final argument, a sudden disappearance, and now a murdered woman found nearby. The police arrested Abbas and charged him with murder, but Abbas refused to confess. He insisted he had not killed Sarah. He claimed the body found in the field did not belong to his wife. Almost nobody believed him. To most people, the explanation seemed obvious. Either Abbas killed Sarah during their final argument and invented the abandonment story to cover it up, or he murdered her because she finally tried to leave him. During the trial, Abbas continued maintaining his innocence, but his words did little to change the outcome. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Their children were sent to live with relatives, and Abbas was taken away to a harsh Syrian prison where he would spend the next 5 years. Inside prison, his life became unbearable. He lost his freedom. He lost his family. And he continued insisting that he had been wrongly accused of killing his wife. At that point, it seemed like the case was over. A tragic ending to a tragic story. Until one day in early 1980, something happened that completely shattered everything people thought they knew. Sarah came home. The woman everyone believed was dead walked back into the village alive. The reaction was immediate. Shock. Confusion. Disbelief. Nobody could understand how this was possible, and Sarah herself was equally confused when she learned what had happened. She claimed that she had been living in Damascus. She said she had no idea anyone believed she was dead. She had no knowledge that Abbas had been arrested or imprisoned. According to her, she had simply returned because she missed her children and wanted to repair her relationship with her husband. The revelation changed everything. Abbas was immediately pardoned and released from prison. After 5 years behind bars, he was finally free. But instead of the reunion everyone expected, the story took an even darker turn. Abbas went home, and in front of their children and several witnesses, he attacked Sarah and killed her. Again. Afterward, he told authorities that Sarah must have known what happened. He claimed she abandoned him while he suffered in prison and left him to face a punishment he believed he never deserved. According to some reports, his lawyer argued that he could not be tried twice for the same crime. What happened afterward is unclear. But considering there were witnesses to the second murder, it is highly likely Abbas was convicted again and returned to prison. As for the original headless body found in the field years earlier, the mystery remains unsolved. Who was that woman? Was she Sarah? Was she someone else entirely? Even after decades, that question remains unanswered. But the story does not end there. Far away from Syria in the remote mountains of Pakistan, another disappearance would unfold. A disappearance surrounded by isolation, family conflict, and one of the harshest environments on Earth. Despite being located relatively far south, Pakistan contains one of the largest concentrations of glaciers anywhere in the world. The country is home to thousands of glaciers, many of them hidden among the towering peaks of the Kohistan region. This is a place defined by massive mountains, deep valleys, and breathtaking landscapes. But behind its beauty lies a brutal reality. The winters here are unforgiving. Snowfall can reach enormous depths. Entire areas become nearly impossible to access. For much of the year, the higher mountains become a frozen wilderness where survival itself becomes a challenge. It is not a place most people would choose to disappear, but sometimes people do not choose their circumstances. Sometimes they are forced into impossible decisions, and that is exactly what happened to a man named Nassi Rutan. By the summer of 1997, Nassi was 31 years old. He had a wife, he had 2 children, and he was living with the consequences of a family conflict that had forced them to abandon their ancestral home in the Palace Valley. The exact reason behind the dispute remains uncertain. Some reports suggest it involved an honor-related conflict with another family. Others suggest it may have been an internal family feud. But whatever the truth was, one thing was clear. Nassi and his family believed they had no choice but to flee, and they disappeared into one of the most remote and unforgiving regions on the planet. But regardless of how the conflict began, one thing is certain. The situation eventually became so violent that it crossed a line that could never be undone. Nassi Rutan's younger brother was murdered. That single event changed everything. The danger was no longer a threat whispered about behind closed doors. It was real. It was deadly. And Nassi knew that if he stayed, he could become the next victim. Not long after, in June of 1997, Nassi and another brother, Cassie Rutan, made a desperate decision. Under the cover of darkness, the 2 men left their ancestral home on horseback. They did not say goodbye. They did not make a public escape. They simply vanished into the night, hoping to outrun the people who wanted them dead. Their destination was one of the most unforgiving places imaginable, the remote and treacherous Lady Valley, hidden deep within Pakistan's Kohistan region. It was not a place chosen for comfort. It was chosen because almost nobody could follow them there. Even during summer, Lady Valley was a nightmare of nature. The mountains were unstable. The slopes were covered with loose rock. Deadly landslides could happen without warning. Avalanches remained a constant threat because snow and ice lingered at higher elevations throughout the year. For most people, these conditions would be terrifying. For Nassi and Cassie, they were protection. The same dangers that made the valley nearly impossible to survive also made it the perfect place to disappear. To make sure anyone tracking them would lose their trail, the brothers avoided common routes. Instead, they followed narrow paths usually used only by local shepherds during the warmer months. Paths that twisted through mountains. Paths where one wrong step could mean death. Nobody knows exactly how long the 2 brothers remained on the run, but during that time, survival became their only priority. They had no homes, no safety, no place they could stay for long. Every night they searched for shelter wherever they could find it. Sometimes they slept inside caves. Sometimes they slept beneath the open sky. They endured freezing temperatures, powerful winds, and the constant fear that someone was still hunting them. They understood one simple rule. Movement meant survival. They never stayed in one location for more than a night or 2. They kept moving through the wilderness, hoping the mountains would hide them forever. But even after everything they did to stay unnoticed, danger eventually caught up with them. One afternoon, while the brothers were guiding their horses through an especially dangerous section of trail near Sapid Valley, the silence of the mountains was suddenly shattered. Gunshots. The sound echoed through the canyon walls. The brothers immediately froze. The mountains made it impossible to determine where the shots had come from. The echoes bounced in every direction, making distant gunfire sound dangerously close. But they understood two terrifying truths. First, their enemies had found them. Second, they were closer than ever before. What happened next remains uncertain because different accounts tell different versions of the story. According to one account, Nassie immediately jumped from his horse and ran toward a nearby cave for cover. Cassie followed moments later. But when he reached the cave, his brother was gone. Completely gone. It was as if he had disappeared in the few seconds between them entering the mountain passage. Another version tells an even more terrifying story. According to this account, Nassie and his horse accidentally fell through a thin layer of ice and vanished into a deep, dark crevasse hidden beneath the frozen surface. A place where no one could reach. A place where the mountain itself swallowed them. Whatever the truth was, Cassie searched desperately. He called his brother's name. He searched the surrounding area. He looked everywhere he could, but there was nothing. No footprints. No clothing. No sign that Nassie had ever been there. Eventually, Cassie realized he had no choice. He had to find help. Late that night, he abandoned the search and took a dangerous alternate route through the mountains to escape whoever had been following them. After a brutal journey, he finally reached a small village the next morning. But when he told local peace officers what happened, their reaction was not what he hoped for. They knew Lady Valley. They knew its reputation. People disappeared there, sometimes because of avalanches, sometimes because of rock slides, and often they were never found. To them, Nassie was probably another victim claimed by the mountains, but Cassie refused to accept that. He begged for help. Eventually, he managed to convince a small search party to return with him into the valley. They searched. They climbed. They looked through the dangerous terrain, but they found nothing. No evidence. No remains. No answer. Slowly, Cassie began to accept the possibility that his brother was gone forever. But he never truly gave up. For years afterward, he returned to the area with relatives, uncles, cousins, anyone willing to help. They searched the mountains again and again, hoping to find Nassie's body so they could at least bring him home and give him a proper burial. But every attempt ended the same way. Nothing. Eventually, after years of searching, Cassie and other family members made one final journey to the place where Nassie disappeared. There they held a small funeral in his memory. They said their goodbyes. Then they returned home and tried to continue living with an unanswered question. What happened to Nassie Rutan? For nearly 3 decades, he existed only as a memory. A brother, a father, a man who vanished into the mountains and was never seen again. Over time, the violent family conflict that forced him to flee eventually faded away. The danger was gone, but the mystery remained until August 1st, 2025. Nearly 30 years after Nassie disappeared, a local shepherd named Umar made a discovery that seemed impossible. Umar and other shepherds regularly brought their animals to graze in the green mountain pastures of Lady Valley. During the colder months, these same areas became frozen wastelands. Even in summer, massive glaciers surrounded the valley, with enormous pieces of ice constantly breaking away and crashing down into the landscape below. But that day, Umar saw something unlike anything he had ever encountered. Frozen inside a massive, unusually clear block of ice was a human body. A man, fully clothed, remarkably preserved. So perfectly preserved that he appeared as if he had died only days earlier. Not decades ago, just days. Umar immediately traveled back to the village to seek help. When local authorities returned to the site several days later, the frozen figure was still there. Removing him was not easy. The rescuers spent hours carefully breaking away the ice that had surrounded him for nearly 30 years. Finally, the body was freed. And then came the discovery that stunned everyone. Inside his clothing was an identification card. The name on it was Nassie Rutan. Authorities quickly confirmed something even more shocking. Nassie's brother had reported him missing all the way back in 1997. For almost 3 decades, everyone believed he had been lost forever. But the mountain had been keeping his secret, and now it had finally released him. The far northern regions of Pakistan are places where time seems to move differently. Many areas remain almost unchanged from generations ago. But one thing has changed: the glaciers. Over the past several decades, rising temperatures have slowly transformed the landscape. Between 1980 and 2024, average temperatures in the region increased significantly. At the same time, snowfall patterns changed, reducing the protective layer of snow that once helped stabilize the ice. As a result, massive sections of glaciers that had remained frozen for decades began breaking apart. And hidden beneath one of those ancient frozen layers was a man whose disappearance had become a family legend. a man who vanished in fear, a man who was swallowed by the mountains, and a man who nearly 30 years later was finally returned home. If the glacier had never begun its slow retreat, Nasi Rudan's fate might have remained hidden beneath the ice forever. His body could have stayed frozen in that silent, unforgiving landscape for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years, preserved like a forgotten message sealed away by nature itself. But after nearly 3 decades of uncertainty, the mountains finally gave back what they had taken. Nasi Rudan was still alive when he received the unbelievable news that his missing brother had finally been found. For years he had searched through the same dangerous valleys, hoping against hope that he might one day bring Nasi home. Now, after almost 30 years of wondering, waiting, and mourning, he was finally able to fulfill the promise he had made long ago. He returned, recovered his brother's remains, and gave him the burial he had deserved all those years before. Yet even with the discovery of Nasi's body, one haunting question remained unanswered. How exactly did he die? And how did he end up trapped inside the ice? The mountains had revealed their secret, but they still refused to tell the entire story. On the morning of April 10th, 1997, Jeffrey Smith woke up beside his wife Judy in their hotel room in Philadelphia. The couple had traveled there from Boston because Jeffrey, a lawyer, was attending a professional conference. It was supposed to be an ordinary work trip mixed with a little sightseeing and time away together as newlyweds. The two had only been married for around 8 months, and they were still enjoying the excitement and closeness of the early stages of marriage. When Jeffrey opened his eyes that morning, he noticed Judy was still asleep beside him. Rather than waking her, he decided to let her rest while he quietly got dressed and headed downstairs for breakfast. It seemed like the kind of small, normal moment couples experience every day. A simple goodbye. A simple morning. A moment neither of them could have known would become their last normal moment together. After finishing breakfast, Jeffrey returned to the room expecting to find Judy getting ready for the day. Instead, he found her in the shower. The two laughed and joked around, enjoying the comfort of being together. Jeffrey even playfully teased her, joking that she should go downstairs and attend the hotel breakfast, dressed exactly as she was at that moment. Of course, it was just a joke between two people who were comfortable with each other. At the time, everything felt completely ordinary. Judy had no professional reason to be in Philadelphia, but she loved exploring new places. She enjoyed traveling, seeing historical landmarks, and experiencing cities she had never visited before. This was her first time in Philadelphia, and while Jeffrey attended his conference, Judy planned to spend the day visiting some of the city's most famous locations, including Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. Before Jeffrey left for the conference, the couple made a simple plan. They would meet back at the hotel room at 5:00 p.m. Then at 6:08 p.m., they would attend a cocktail event together. Nothing complicated. Nothing unusual. Just a normal evening plan between a husband and wife. They kissed goodbye and Jeffrey left for his conference. Judy stayed behind, preparing for her day of sightseeing. At the time, neither of them knew that this goodbye would become the beginning of a mystery that would remain unsolved for years. When the conference finally ended around 5:30 p.m., slightly later than expected, Jeffrey returned to the hotel room. He expected to open the door and see Judy waiting inside. But when he stepped into the room, something immediately felt wrong. It was empty. At first, Jeffrey wasn't alarmed. He assumed there had simply been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Judy had gone downstairs early. Maybe she thought they were supposed to meet at the cocktail event instead. So he walked back down to the conference area and searched through the crowd. He looked around carefully. He checked every corner. But Judy was nowhere to be found. He returned to the room and waited. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Still nothing. Over the next half hour, Jeffrey repeatedly walked between the hotel room and the cocktail event, hoping that at any moment Judy would appear and explain that it was all just a misunderstanding. But she never did. By around 6:30 p.m., the worry inside him had turned into genuine fear. Something was wrong. He approached the hotel concierge and explained that his wife was missing. The staff immediately began contacting nearby hospitals, wondering if Judy had been involved in some kind of accident or suffered a medical emergency while sightseeing. But every hospital they called had the same answer. No one matching Judy's description had been admitted. Then Jeffrey remembered Judy's plans for the day. She had left the hotel that morning and boarded a sightseeing tour bus that would take visitors around Philadelphia's landmarks. Desperate for any clue, Jeffrey decided to retrace her possible route. He hired a taxi and followed the path the tour bus would have taken, scanning streets, sidewalks, and public areas, hoping to see some sign of his wife. But every search ended the same way. Nothing. No answers. No clues. No Judy. Hours passed. The city grew darker. And eventually, near midnight, Jeffrey realized he had no choice. He went to the police station to report his wife missing. But instead of beginning a search, he encountered another devastating obstacle. The police told him they could not officially take a missing person report until 24 hours had passed since Judy was last seen. It was policy, and there was nothing Jeffrey could do. Frustrated, exhausted, and terrified, he returned to the hotel. That night he barely slept. He lay awake in the darkness, replaying every possible scenario in his mind. Where was Judy? Had something happened to her? Was she hurt somewhere waiting for help? Or was there something far worse that he hadn't even considered yet? The next morning, before returning to the police station, Jeffrey attended the conference again. There he spoke with several influential attendees, including Philadelphia's mayor and a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He explained what had happened. He told them about his missing wife, and he told them how the police had refused to take the report. Apparently concerned by what they heard, both officials contacted the police department and expressed their frustration. So when Jeffrey arrived back at the station that morning, things were different. 2 detectives were waiting for him. An investigation finally began, but almost immediately the case took an unexpected turn. Instead of treating Jeffrey only as a desperate husband searching for his missing wife, investigators began looking at him as a possible suspect. Despite the fact that his whereabouts during the time Judy disappeared were supported by witnesses and conference records, suspicion still surrounded him. Other detectives considered a different possibility. They wondered if Judy had simply walked away voluntarily. Maybe she was experiencing some kind of personal crisis. Maybe she wanted to disappear for a while. Maybe she would eventually return. But days passed, and Judy did not come home. With the investigation moving slowly, Judy's family decided they could not simply wait. Her 2 adult children from a previous marriage traveled to Philadelphia as soon as they heard their mother had vanished. They searched the city themselves. They rented bicycles and traveled from place to place. They checked hospitals. They visited homeless shelters. They even searched the morgue. Everywhere they went, they hoped they would find an answer. But every location brought them the same thing, another dead end. And with each passing day, the mystery surrounding Judy's disappearance only became darker. After spending days in Philadelphia desperately waiting for some kind of breakthrough, Jeffrey finally reached a point where he had no choice but to return home to Boston. But leaving the city did not mean he was giving up. Not for a second. The search for Judy continued. Even while trying to return to his normal life and go back to work, Jeffrey refused to let her disappear into silence. He used every resource he had. Through his job, he sent out thousands of missing person flyers, nearly 9,000 copies containing Judy's photograph, her description, and information about her disappearance. The flyers were sent across the region through fax machines and mail, reaching businesses, organizations, and communities throughout the area. But once again, nothing came back. No confirmed location. No undeniable proof. No answer. Just more uncertainty. Then about a week after Judy vanished, the case began attracting attention from Philadelphia media outlets. Her face appeared in newspapers. Her story appeared on television. The more people who learned about Judy, the more reports started coming in. Most of them led nowhere. Many were simply mistaken identities, ordinary people thinking they had seen someone familiar. But some reports stood out. Some details were too unusual to ignore. Several people claimed they had seen a woman matching Judy's description during the hours after she disappeared on April 10th, 1997, while she was believed to have been alone in Philadelphia. One person reported seeing a woman they believed was Judy around 3:00 p.m. near Broad and Locust Streets. According to the witness, the woman looked confused, lost, almost as if she didn't know where she was or what she was doing. 2 additional sightings came from the Penn's Landing area. Both witnesses described a woman who appeared distressed and mentally troubled. But perhaps the strangest report came from the Society Hill Hotel. Hotel employees claimed that Judy had actually checked into the hotel several days after she disappeared. According to their records, a woman believed to be Judy stayed there from April 13th through April 15th. The only problem was that she had checked in under a false name, and what happened during her stay left many employees deeply unsettled. Several staff members later described her as one of the strangest guests they had encountered. They said she appeared to be experiencing some kind of serious mental disturbance. She reportedly spoke to herself. At times, she seemed to be speaking in unfamiliar words or phrases that staff described as being like another language. She also told employees that someone she called the Emperor would send her money so she could continue staying at the hotel. But the most disturbing incident reportedly happened when staff noticed her standing in front of an open window. She was behaving in a way that shocked those who witnessed it, completely unaware or unconcerned that others could see her. To hotel workers, this was not the behavior of someone simply taking a vacation. It was the behavior of someone who appeared deeply troubled, Another possible sighting came from New Jersey. A clerk and a customer at a Macy's department store reported encountering a woman they believe could have been Judy. The woman had allegedly been shopping for her daughter. She reportedly mentioned that her daughter rarely liked the things she picked out for her. To Judy's family, that detail was especially meaningful. It sounded exactly like something Judy would say, but there was another detail that made the report even more convincing. The woman was carrying a distinctive red backpack. A backpack Judy was known to take almost everywhere. Her family remembered that she had it with her when she traveled to Philadelphia. But even this sighting contained something strange. As the woman left the store, she reportedly tried to convince another customer to leave with her, a detail that left investigators wondering what exactly was happening. Almost every credible sighting connected to Judy contained some unusual element. People described a woman who seemed confused, frightened, disconnected, or mentally unwell. The reports gave investigators more possibilities to explore, but they never produced the one thing everyone wanted. They never led them to Judy. For the next 5 months, this became the painful reality for both investigators and Judy's family. Every lead seemed promising at first. Every possibility created hope, and every time that hope disappeared, Jeffrey even hired private investigators to search for answers. They followed leads. They examined possibilities. They looked into every theory they could find, but nothing brought them any closer to discovering what had happened to Judy. Then, after months of uncertainty, everything changed. But not in Philadelphia. Not anywhere close to where Judy had vanished. The answer appeared hundreds of miles away in a place nobody expected. On September 7th, 1997, a father and son were hunting in a national forest near Asheville, North Carolina. It started as an ordinary morning in the wilderness, until they discovered something horrifying. Near a picnic area hidden among the trees, they found scattered human remains. Bones. Fragments. Evidence of someone who had been there long before they arrived. But the most disturbing discovery was nearby. A shallow grave. It appeared that someone had once buried the body there. However, over time, wild animals had disturbed the grave, exposing what was underneath and scattering the remains across the forest floor. Authorities were immediately called. Investigators arrived and began the difficult process of identifying the unknown victim. The medical examiner carefully examined the remains. Based on the condition of the bones, they determined the victim was likely a woman between 40 and 55 years old. Then, investigators noticed something else. The left knee showed severe signs of arthritis, a physical detail that could potentially become the key to unlocking the identity of the person who had been lying forgotten in that forest. And as investigators continued searching for answers, one possibility began to emerge. Could this finally be the missing woman everyone had been searching for? Could these remains belong to Judy? Further examination of the remains revealed a horrifying truth. The marks and fractures found on the bones were not the result of an accident or natural causes. Investigators discovered distinctive damage patterns that indicated the woman had suffered multiple stab wounds before her death. What began as a mysterious discovery in the wilderness had now become a homicide investigation. But the question remained, who was this woman? And how had she ended up hundreds of miles away from where she disappeared? The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A doctor at a North Carolina hospital happened to see a news report about the unidentified remains discovered in the forest. Something about the story caught his attention. He remembered another case. A woman who had vanished from Philadelphia earlier that year. A missing woman whose disappearance had received widespread attention. Judy believing there could be a connection, the doctor immediately sent a copy of the news report to Philadelphia authorities. That single decision changed everything. Investigators contacted Jeffrey and obtained Judy's dental records. Those records were then sent to North Carolina, where forensic experts carefully compared them with the remains recovered from the forest. The result confirmed what everyone feared. The unidentified woman was 50-year-old Judy. After months of searching, the mystery of where Judy had gone was finally solved. But in many ways, the discovery only created more questions. The answer to where she was had been found, but the answers to why she was there and what happened to her remained hidden. The location where Judy was discovered raised immediate concerns. Her remains told a confusing story. The bones of her legs were still covered by the clothing she had been wearing when she died. She was wearing jeans. She was wearing hiking boots, but there was something strange. Jeffrey had never seen Judy wear those clothes before. They were not the outfit she had been wearing when she left the hotel in Philadelphia. The mystery deepened even further when investigators examined the belongings found near the grave. Judy's famous red backpack was missing. The backpack that everyone who knew her remembered. The backpack she rarely went anywhere without. Instead, authorities found a completely different bag. a black and blue vinyl backpack lying near the remains. They also discovered a pair of expensive sunglasses, but according to Jeffrey, they did not belong to Judy. Every new piece of evidence seemed to create another unanswered question. Why was Judy wearing unfamiliar clothes? Where was her backpack? Who did the other belongings belong to? And how did she travel more than 600 miles from Philadelphia to Asheville? As investigators in North Carolina continued digging into Judy's final days, they discovered something even stranger. There were possible sightings of Judy in the Asheville area shortly after her disappearance. One report came from the Biltmore Estate, one of the most famous tourist attractions in the region. A staff member there claimed to have seen a woman matching Judy's description. Other witnesses also came forward. Several local businesses reported encounters with a woman they believed was Judy. One of those witnesses worked at a store in Asheville. According to the clerk, the woman told them that her husband was an attorney from Boston and that he was attending a conference in Philadelphia. She reportedly explained that because her husband was busy, she decided to visit Asheville on her own. At first glance, the story sounded believable, but one detail made everyone stop and question everything. Asheville was more than 600 miles away from Philadelphia. Why would Judy suddenly travel such a massive distance without telling anyone? Jeffrey and Judy's children found this especially strange because Judy had never mentioned Asheville. She had never talked about wanting to visit. She had never expressed any interest in going there. It was as if she had somehow ended up in a place completely disconnected from her original plans. Another witness, the owner of a local deli, remembered a woman matching Judy's description entering the store. The woman arrived in a gray vehicle and purchased around $30 worth of food along with a toy truck. Then another possible sighting came from a nearby campground owner. He claimed a woman matching Judy's description arrived in a gray sedan and asked if she could stay at the campground inside her vehicle. While speaking with her, he noticed the car was packed with boxes and bags. When he explained that she could not camp inside her vehicle, the woman simply left. A gray vehicle, boxes and bags, a woman traveling alone. Each detail added another piece to the puzzle, but the picture still refused to come together. These sightings were important because they suggested Judy may have reached Asheville voluntarily, but they also created the most disturbing question of all. If Judy went there willingly, how did she end up murdered and buried in the woods? Investigators found themselves divided. One detective familiar with the case believed Judy traveled to Asheville by choice. According to this theory, she was not kidnapped or forced there. She went there willingly, but even if that was true, it still failed to explain the final moments of her life. How did a woman who appeared to travel freely end up in a shallow grave? How did she become the victim of a violent crime? Early in the investigation, North Carolina authorities ruled Jeffrey out as a suspect. There were several reasons. For one, Jeffrey had been attending the conference when Judy disappeared. His location was documented. Witnesses could confirm where he was. There was also another major factor. Investigators questioned whether Jeffrey was physically capable of carrying out such a crime. Jeffrey was reportedly severely overweight, and his physical limitations made detectives doubt he could have overpowered Judy, transported her hundreds of miles, and buried her alone in a remote, wooded area. To North Carolina investigators, the evidence did not point toward him. However, Philadelphia police viewed the situation differently. They were not fully convinced. And despite the passage of time, Jeffrey has never been officially cleared by Philadelphia authorities. The question that has haunted the case for decades remains the same. Was Judy a woman who walked away from her old life before meeting a tragic fate? Or was she the victim of something much darker that began long before anyone realized she was missing? The truth remains buried with the unanswered questions surrounding her final journey. This case remains one of those haunting mysteries where every possible explanation seems to create even more questions. One of the biggest points of suspicion surrounding Jeffrey came from his refusal to take a polygraph examination. However, Jeffrey later explained that he was not completely refusing the idea of a lie detector test. He claimed that he was only unwilling to participate unless the examination was conducted by the FBI. The exact reason behind that condition remains unclear, leaving another unanswered question hanging over an already confusing investigation. As the years passed, one person close to Judy began suggesting that there may have been serious problems hidden beneath the surface of the couple's marriage. A friend of Judy claimed that their relationship was far from perfect, describing their marriage as unstable, despite the fact that they had only been married for around 8 months. According to this friend, there were signs that Judy and Jeffrey were struggling behind closed doors. However, this account stands almost entirely alone. Everyone else who knew the couple described their relationship very differently. Friends, relatives, and acquaintances told investigators that they had never seen any major issues between Jeffrey and Judy. They portrayed the couple as happy and newly married, enjoying what should have been the beginning of their life together. With such conflicting stories, the truth became even harder to uncover. Tragically, Jeffrey passed away in 2005 without ever discovering the answer to the questions that had haunted him for years. He never learned why Judy suddenly disappeared from Philadelphia, why she somehow ended up hundreds of miles away in Asheville, or what truly happened during those final moments of her life. But the mystery did not disappear with him. Authorities in both Philadelphia and North Carolina have continued to keep the case open, still searching for the missing pieces that could finally explain Judy's final journey. And after all these years, the biggest questions remain unanswered. Why did Judy travel more than 600 miles away from where she was last seen? The reported sightings suggest that she may have gone there willingly. Witnesses described a woman who appeared to be acting independently, traveling through stores, asking questions, and even explaining that she was visiting Asheville while her husband attended a conference. But if Judy truly chose to go there herself, what happened afterward? Did she suffer from some kind of sudden mental health crisis that caused her to leave behind her normal life without explanation? Was someone manipulating her or guiding her to a place where she would never return from? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, who buried Judy in that remote forest and why? The evidence creates a story filled with contradictions. A woman who appeared to be moving freely, yet somehow ended up dead and hidden away in the wilderness. A journey that should have been impossible to explain. A trail of sightings that only deepened the mystery instead of solving it. After decades, Judy's disappearance remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the truth is not hidden because there are no clues. Sometimes the truth is hidden because there are too many.